What's with St. Louis? We'll have some answers next on City Corner. I'm Steve Potter, and welcome to City Corner. We're going to answer some questions today. What's with St. Louis? That's an open-ended question, I think. I'd like to introduce you to our guest right now. That's Valerie Kienzle. She is the author of What's with St. Louis, The Quirks, Personality, and Charm of the Gateway City. Hi, Valerie. Good to see you again.
Good to see you, too. Thank you for
having me. You
were
on the show, I want to say maybe 2 years ago.
Yes.
Because you had a first edition of this book.
Yes.
And so what's different with the new one?
Well, a little bit of backstory. The first one was included in that fire that hit the South St. Louis
DeReedy Press
warehouse.
fire.
Yes, So the first edition went up in smoke, so to speak.
But you must have sold some of them, right?
Oh, yeah, we had many. It went into second printing, but then rather than just do a straight rerun, the publisher, Josh Stevens, decided to do some updates. When we did the first one, we did not have room to include everything that came to mind. So this includes about a third more content, and we took out some of the old things. Mm-hmm. So some of it's repeats, a lot of it's new.
Well, Valerie, what was your concept with this? Because the book title says it, The Quirks, Personality, and Charm of the Gateway City. So it's a lot of little things a lot of us never would have heard about before?
Yes. Josh, he is a native St. Louisan. He came up with a list and this idea of things that he had always wondered. And he said, you, as a non-native, I'd like you to come up with a list of things you've always wondered about St. Louis. So we did, and combined our list, and that was how we came up with What's with St. Louis.
Do you think people that are native St. Louisans see this differently than people that aren't here, or is this for everybody?
I think this is for everybody, but I think people who live here or anywhere, they take their hometown for granted, and there's things and aspects about the town that are just fabulous, and those of us who are transplants look around and go, wow.
Hey, well, let me ask you that. As a transplant, what were your first impressions? Do you remember?
I started work for the 7-Up Company's headquarters when they were in Clayton, and I attended an event down at the old courthouse one night, and it was all candlelit. They had a string quartet, and it was one of those meet and greet type situations in representing the company. And I looked up at the ceiling inside, and I was just wowed. It just was fabulous. And then I started looking and noticing the architecture downtown and just some of the beautiful houses.
And the bricks we have, right?
Yes, the bricks, yes. And there's a story behind that too, because St. Louis, right near where Dogtown and the Hill is, has something called Cheltenham Syncline, and it's a certain type of clay that is ideal for brick production. Yes.
You know, I think you kind of made reference to people sometimes in St. Louis take it for granted, and the bricks is a good example because not all cities have old brick areas like St. Louis does, and you don't really appreciate that unless you go to other cities.
Right.
In fact, people pay money for our bricks, don't they?
Yes. From what I have understood, there is a big market for St. Louis bricks, recycled bricks.
Well, the name of your book, What's with St. Louis? And so these are just some of the bizarre, and I mean that in a good way, bizarre kind of topics you have here. And let me throw out a couple to you and you explain them to me. Can beaver be eaten during Lent? What's that all about?
There are certain places in the country during the 6 weeks of Lent that the Archdiocese for those particular areas will allow a dispensation, which means that certain meats can be eaten on Fridays. And there is a restaurant down on Washington Avenue that does serve beaver during Lent. The name, it escapes me at this point. But anyway, so I talked to the Archdiocese, and apparently there is no dispensation for being able to eat beaver during Lent. Even though it is considered a semi-aquatic animal, it is not considered by St. Louis.
So is this a big deal? Are there really a lot of people that want to eat beaver during Lent?
No idea. But apparently this restaurant gets a pretty good, draws a pretty good amount of people.
I have to say, I thought I tried everything, but I can't say I've ever tried beaver. Have you?
No, and I won't.
Okay, it's on my don't touch list too, probably psychological reasons. Let's take a look at one of the images from your book, What's with St. Louis, and we'll continue with these odd stories. And that looks, that's the St. Louis Riverfront, obviously.
Right.
Is that the Eads Bridge there?
Yes. St. Louis was founded as a river trading, or a fur trading outpost on the river, and it just grew from there, being near the Missouri and the Mississippi and the Illinois rivers. It made it a crossroads. Plus, in the middle of the country, it was just ideal for trade in situations like that. And so at one time along the riverfront, you would see just wagons and as many as 100 steamboats pulled in there to drop things off. At that time, they were shipped in big barrels, wooden barrels.
Yeah, I come from descendants of people, Germans that owned cooperage businesses in St. Louis, which made those big shipping barrels that nobody knows what they are anymore, but that was a big industry at the time.
Yes, it was. Yes.
You know, when I'm down on the St. Louis Riverfront, looking at a picture like we just looked at, I always think what it was like there before the bridges were put in. And think of what it took to transport horses and wagons and people from Illinois to Missouri before bridges.
Yes, when the Eads Bridge opened in 1874, that was a really big deal because prior to that point, the railroads would come to Illinois and they would unload onto ferries, and then the ferries would come across the river and they'd reload back onto the trains again. So it really was a transportation marvel to be able to go across it on a bridge.
Yeah, commuters today wouldn't get that, would they?
No.
When they're coming over the Poplar Street Bridge. Let's take a look at another image from your book.
Okay.
What's with St. Louis? Oh, I see some beer.
Yes. Okay, St. Louis, you talk about German influence. At one time, a quarter of the St. Louis population had attributed themselves as being German-born. And so the Germans came here, they had a strong work ethic, they came and brought their families, and they also brought their recipes for beer. So there were many, many breweries here in St. Louis. And
So do you prefer beer to Beaver?
yes. Although I haven't never tried Beaver, but no.
But you have tried beer.
Yes.
Let me ask you something else, Valerie. Why, and this is in your book, why are pieces of metal track embedded in some local streets?
Okay, well, at one point, St. Louis, as a major hub, had multiple streetcar trails and tracks going through. And some of these rails were just, you want to say, paved over or bricked over. And the streets department, even now, when they go to look for water mains, sometimes they will dig and find these random pieces of metal. And that goes back to St. Louis's days when it was a hub for streetcars.
Do they do anything with that, I wonder? Do they just throw it away, the metal pieces?
I have no idea. That's
Seems
a
like
good
they should be
question.
collected or something.
It seems like it should be, yeah, but I have no idea. Good question.
Let's take a look at another image from your book. These are the quirky things that we find in St. Louis. Well, that's Compton water tower, right?
Yes. Also known as a standpipe. At one time in the United States, there were hundreds of those throughout the U.S. Now there are just 7, and St. Louis has 3 that are remaining. They are on the National Register of Historic Places. What they did, the water was once pumped through pipes to houses and businesses, and there were steam engines that pumped the water. Well, sometimes there would be like a large pressure surge, and the water could shoot out in the houses and in the businesses.
Really?
So these standpipes took some of the pressure off of the water being pumped through with steam. And there were a number of people that wanted to tear these down in St. Louis in decades past, but thankfully the preservationists won.
Now, you said there were 3?
3 here, 7 in the United States.
There's one on the north end of Grand, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where's the third one?
This Grand, Compton, and
That's right, it's not a quiz.
yeah.
But overall in the country, there are just a handful, aren't there? There aren't many of these left at all.
7.
Right.
So we're pretty lucky to have these.
Did you
still
learn
there.
anything, did anything surprise you when you were doing research for this book? Anything that was even quirkier than you thought?
I wouldn't say it was quirky, but I was surprised and just really wowed. I learned that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had made at least six appearances here, public appearances here in St. Louis. He spoke at Temple Israel, he spoke at Hebrew congregation, he spoke at St. Louis University, and at several churches, and I had no idea. And I had no idea he had even been here in a public way. I went to the Missouri Historical Society's Skinker Boulevard, their resource and history center, and found a little plaque in there that said, Dr. King spoke here. And at that time, it was a Jewish temple, and I was just wowed by that, too. How amazing.
Yeah. What's with St. Louis? Let's take a look at another image from your book. And I wonder how many different subject matters do you address in this book? Hundreds?
About 85.
It seems like hundreds.
Yes.
It's a lot. What's this?
Okay, at one point in St. Louis history, there were restrictions on where people could live, where people could travel, and it was the time leading up to the Civil Rights Movement, the early 20th century. And this was a real pivotal thing for St. Louis. We had lunch counter demonstrations. We also had a case of a family named Shelley that bought a house, and they wanted to move into what was not an integrated neighborhood. It ended up going all the way to Supreme Court, and it was decided in their favor. So
I know that's an incredible
it is.
Story. My grandfather was principal in Normandy High School to the 60s when integration was starting, and it was so controversial then. I mean, it seemed like a big deal. The people that didn't look like you might move next door.
Yes.
It's really kind of puts things in perspective, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah. Let's look at another image from your book.
Okay. Bocce balls or bocce balls. There are actually two ways that I'm told that you can pronounce it. I'm told that St. Louisans often pronounce it bocce without the T, but the rest of the country calls it bocce. These are some pretty high-end ones. The ones that I've seen, there were 4 red and 4 green. It was a game that was brought to St. Louis from Italy by the people who settled on the hill. There's still a place called Milo's Tavern where you can go and play, and it has long, narrow alleys, somewhat like shuffleboard, and it's just a lot of fun.
So that's a St. Louis thing? I didn't realize that.
It is, because there has spread to other parts of the country, but it is big time St. Louis. And I talked to the owner of Milo's Tavern. He remembers going to a place called Rose's Bar and Grill down the hill decades ago, and said it had just been there as long as people could remember.
Valerie Kienzle is our guest today. She's written the book, What's with St. Louis? We're going to take a little break and pick up right where we left off after this.
Check. Oh, you got it.
Since I got rid of my car, I really enjoy walking.
Okay. Got it.
Getting pulled over for buzz driving could cost you around $10,000 in fines, legal fees, and increased insurance rates.
Oh, you're home early. You live with your mom?
That'll set your game back a few years. Buzzed, busted, and broke. Because buzz driving is drunk driving.
I'm Steve Potter. Welcome back to City Corner. We're talking with author, historian Valerie Kienzle about the second edition of her book, What's with St. Louis? The Quirks, Personality, and Charm of the Gateway City. Well, Valerie, you said before that you didn't grow up here. You moved here as an adult, and so you noticed things that were kind of unusual and quirky in a good way about St. Louis, and that's what you're documenting. What about two things that people always mention when they come here? I'm not sure if it's in your book or not, but do you address Provel cheese and Ted Drewes?
Oh, yes. Yes. That was something when I moved here. Nashville, Tennessee is where I grew up. Did not have a big Italian population. And then I went down to the hill and discovered Provel cheese. And toasted ravioli and mascacholi, and then stop for a side trip at Ted Drew's. And you could eat your way through St. Louis. It's fabulous.
I get in fights with people about Provel cheese all the time.
In what way?
Well, I could eat it every day, and then I have people that say that's not real cheese, and I get in big arguments with them.
Well, it has 3 ingredients.
Yes, but it's real cheese.
Yeah, it's cheese.
People get really passionate about it.
Sure.
Let's take another look at an image from your book. What's up with St. Louis? The Clydesdales.
Yes, we are very fortunate to have those beautiful horses to represent Anheuser-Busch and also our city. There are 3 hitch teams around the country, and St. Louis is where the horses are bred and born. And the use started in 1933 with the end of Prohibition. Augie Busch was very much a fan of the draft horses he saw in Germany. And he decided, always looking for a way to promote and to make a big statement, he decided to buy a hitch of these and brought it here and had a wagon custom made, took it to Washington, D.C. and delivered the first Budweiser to come off the line to President Franklin D. Roosevelt, and he used the hitch to do so.
That's interesting. Let's take a look at another image. And there's really nothing you don't cover in this, is there?
No, there's some things that still, maybe 3rd edition, who knows?
What's this?
Okay, this is from the Missouri Botanical Garden, and
What a treasure that is, huh?
Yes, yes, this is their holiday lights display out in the main entryway where the water fountain is, and it's just a beautiful jewel. It has the climatron, it has the Japanese garden, which is just a beauty, a thing of beauty in itself.
Here's something you address in your book. What about those turtles on the old iron fence at the courthouse downtown? What's the story there?
Interesting story. Back when the courthouse was still used as a courthouse up until 1930, there was a maintenance worker there named James Quigley, and he did everything to take care of the courthouse. But he found this turtle out in one of the fountains, and he took it upon himself to feed the turtle and take care of it. Unfortunately, one fall, much like what we have had in our fall this year, it got really cold really quickly, and the turtle froze. So the turtle was much loved in St. Louis, so much so that one of the newspapers printed an obituary for the turtle. And Mr. Quigley was quoted in the obituary saying that was the only thing in the St. Louis courthouse that didn't cost the taxpayers money.
Oh, ouch.
So when the courthouse was put on the National Register and renovations were done, they hired a company down in Crestwood to do some wrought iron work and some fencing, and so that is a nod to the turtle who used to live down there.
I wonder if that's connected anyway to the, it's a new installation. Well, I say new, across from the zoo, across the highway, that Turtle Park.
Turtle Park. I don't know if there's.
I don't know if that
connection
inspired
there
it or not.
Don't know. Good
That'd
question.
be interesting to find out.
Yes, it would.
Listen, you have a background as a newspaper reporter, and you've done freelancing, of course. You've written other books like Columbia and St. Charles about those 2 cities.
Yes.
Right. And also, you had the precursor to this book. Anything else that we should know?
A book last year that came out called Lost St. Louis.
Right.
And it takes a look at some of the items and buildings and things and ways of life that are no more in St. Louis.
All right. Let's go back and look at some more images from your book in the time we have remaining. What? I think they should put that on every site.
Don't you?
Yes.
That's the rolling stop. And in St. Louis, it seems like there are just 1 million stop signs. There's actually 22,000 on about 1,000 miles of street.
Really?
This is just in the city. And often people think that they're put there to hinder them, to slow them down. Well, apparently they do studies to see traffic patterns, and it's for safety and for pedestrians, not just to be a pain to people who are trying to get to work on time. So there is an ordinance that says you have to come to a full and complete stop.
You can get a ticket for that.
Yeah, no roll-throughs. You don't just do a cursory look both ways and then keep rolling. So anyway, that's a nod to that.
What about that Japanese garden at the Missouri Botanical Garden? Why is that in St. Louis?
There was an organization called the Japanese American Culture Society, or League, And they wanted to do an installation of a garden. So there was a tract of 14 acres in the botanical garden. It used to be just forested land. And that was taken. There was a world-renowned architect who was hired to produce this Japanese garden. They had just the rock placement, everything is symbolic. And it's called a peek and discover. As you walk, you look around, you see something different. There are odd numbers of rocks stacked, and it's all symbolic. And it's also has a tea room there that is only open during the Japanese festival. There were workers that were brought to do that. There were no nails used in the production of that. So it's a beautiful place to enjoy.
And let's see, I was trying to find another one here on my list. Why is St. Louis sometimes called the Mound City?
Okay, that nickname was given to the city by some of the riverboat captains back in the 1800s. At one time, St. Louis had 24 mounds, much like in Cahokia, maybe not as large, but the riverboat captains said they knew they were approaching St. Louis when they saw these mounds. Well, progress, things were torn down, and today there's only one mound left, and that is Sugarloaf Mound, which has had a house on it, which is probably why it didn't get raised. It had a house on the peak, but it has been given back to the Osage Nation, and they assure that nothing will ever happen to that mound.
Let's take a look at two more images from your book, and you can tell us what it's all about. Well, there we go, a little bit of rock and roll, right?
Yes. Sweetmeat. Interesting. Pig. Why a pig? Okay, a story behind this. The gentleman that owned Keishi, which used to have its format targeted to women in the early 60s.
I didn't realize that.
Yes, that's why it was called Keishi.
It was not always Rock Station?
No, no. Shelley Grafman is the man who bought it, he and another gentleman, and they decided to totally change the format because they were just not, it was not doing real well as a women's only type thing with polka music and classical music. So anyway, it was decided maybe they needed to have some kind of symbolic representation or logo. There was an obscure album by a group called Blodwen's Pig. It was a group in the early 70s, and they had this pig image on their album. Well, a very informal agreement was arranged, like, could we use that pig? Oh, sure, you can use that pig. So that was the pig that was used, and suddenly it became part of Keishi's representation in their identity. He's been seen wearing everything from black skinny jeans to having a nose ring to having a little, smoking a little something that's legal in Colorado.
It's almost legal here.
Yeah, sunglasses. Anyway, so Keishi had a contest, 1974, and they wanted to name the pig contest. So there was a kid in Afton, 15 years old, and his name was picked as the winner, Sweetmeat. And do you know what the prize was? Can you guess?
Pork or?
50 pounds of bacon. And I got this information from veteran Keishi DJ Ron Stevens. And
He's a legend.
Yes, he was one of the first, and he was the old timer at age 21. But he said he always wondered what a kid did with 50 pounds of bacon.
Eat it in about a day and a half. That's what I would have done.
Yeah.
Let's look at another image from your book, What's Up with St. Louis. There's a beautiful view from the arch.
Yes, and that shows the renovation down there that now connects the old courthouse to the arch grounds, and it's just beautiful. If you haven't been down there, it's worth seeing.
I haven't been there since it's reopened, and the museum downstairs is supposed to be really jazzed up too.
Yes, yes.
What's it like?
Just all kinds of updated interactive type displays, not the stuffed animals that used to be in there.
Let's look at another image.
Okay, this is on a building that is now a Drury Inn, and it sits on 20th Street, right off of Market Street. It has a Lombardo's restaurant in the base of it.
Is that sort of near Union Station, or I'm trying to picture it?
Yeah, it's right there. So what this used to be, it was a YMCA that was put there for railroad workers to give them a place to work out, to relax when they were in town between shifts. And so that sign was put in to the side of it, and it's still used now as a jury.
Really? That's neat. I think we have two more images left from your book. Why don't we look at those? the remaining minutes that we have. Oh, I think this is the last one, actually, yeah.
Okay. At one point, St. Louis was the hub of shoe wear, shoe production, and
Brown shoe, right?
yes, Brown Shoe. There was the Edison Shoe Company. Red Goose Shoes started here, as did Buster Brown Shoes.
And I guess every city can't say that.
No, they can't. And one of the reasons why it took off was because we had lots of river transportation opportunities and the railroads, and it was very easy to get things in and get things out.
Let's talk about sports a little bit. St. Louis has always been a sports town. Remember the Rams? They used to be here.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's the Cardinals, of course, but a lot of people don't realize that soccer has some interesting history here, too.
Yes, yes. St. Louis is definitely a soccer city. And 2 championship teams, one of them was St. Louis University, 1972, went all the way to the top. And somebody asked me, well, is St. Louis still a big soccer town? And the answer is yes. I talked to some people in the know, Terry Mickler, and he said, yes, it is. It's more club soccer now, where in the past it was more associated with parishes and things like that. But yes, still very popular.
You have something on page 164 of your book. Are you making fun of us? You call these skyscrapers?
Other people have said that too, and that gives a nod to the Wainwright Building downtown.
Which is recognized internationally, is it not?
Yes, it was recognized as the first skyscraper, not for its height, but for the method of its interior and production and its clean lines that went up and down.
Here's one that I always, besides Provel cheese, I always argue with people about summers. When they complain that St. Louis is too hot and humid, I said, it's called summer, get over it.
Yes.
But you have a chapter on that too. Why do I feel like I'm in an outdoor sauna?
Well, it has to do with the weather and where we sit. There's not a lot of mountains that break up.
Well, Valerie, we want to thank you for your book. We'll look forward to your next work coming out. It's What's with St. Louis, the quirks, personality, and charm of the Gateway City. You can go to Reedy Press right there, reedypress.com for more information. I know you've got a couple of book signings coming up. You have one December 1st, Main Street Books. Where's that?
That is in St. Charles
And December 8th?
at 6 North Cafe in Baldwin.
Valerie Kienzle, thank you so much. It's always fun to talk to you. And I love your take on St. Louis.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on City Corner. I'm Steve Potter. Have a great time.